After the flood, humanity began again. The waters had retreated. The ancient cities were gone. The world seemed silent once more. But mankind had not forgotten the fear. Stories of the destruction of the old world still lived among the generations. Fathers spoke to their sons about darkened skies, mountains swallowed by endless waters, entire civilizations disappearing beneath the fury of the flood. And for a time, humanity remained scattered. Small tribes, families surviving across deserts, valleys, and ancient mountains, until something began to change. Men started gathering once again. Caravans grew larger. The first great cities slowly returned. And then, one name began to dominate that new age: Nimrod. Ancient texts describe him as a mighty ruler, a legendary hunter. But as the years passed, his power grew far beyond that. Nimrod did not want to rule tribes. He wanted to unite humanity itself. One civilization, one language, one people. And it was in the plains of Shinar that vision began to take shape. The land was vast, fertile, surrounded by great rivers. Thousands crossed the horizon carrying stones, tools, and metals. For the first time since the flood, humanity once again seemed to move toward greatness. But something felt different within that civilization. The scale, the ambition, the speed. Everything was growing too quickly. Massive cities rose among canals and colossal walls. Furnaces burned day and night. Molten bronze illuminated the darkness. Gold and silver decorated temples, pillars, and gigantic gates. Men began believing they could rebuild a world even greater than the one destroyed by the waters. And at the center of that civilization, something impossible began rising toward the heavens: the tower. At first, it seemed like another monumental construction. But as it grew, the world around it appeared to change as well. Thousands of workers moved across enormous ramps. Cyclopean stairways spiraled around the structure. Entire platforms were supported by pillars covered in ancient bronze. Astronomical symbols made of silver reflected sunlight across the walls of the tower. And at its summit, golden layers shimmered above the clouds. The tower dominated the entire horizon. Even from miles away, it was impossible not to see it. Men looked upon that structure as if witnessing the birth of something eternal. Because Babel was not merely a city, it was a symbol, a new humanity, a new beginning, without fear of the heavens, without fear of judgment, without limits. And as the tower rose higher, human pride rose with it. Nimrod walked among the crowds like an absolute king. His dark robes, covered with ancient golden details, reflected the fire of Babel's massive furnaces. Around him stood priests, warriors, architects, astronomers, all working toward the same vision. Mankind no longer desired survival alone. They wanted to reach the heavens themselves. The nights in Babel became unsettling. The glow of the furnaces illuminated the entire city. The colossal shadow of the tower stretched for miles beneath the moonlight. The winds changed around the structure. Storms gathered beyond the horizon. Still, nobody stopped. Because the greater Babel became, the more humanity believed it stood on the edge of the impossible. Ancient records preserve a disturbing phrase from that time: "Let us make a name for ourselves." It was more than pride, it was independence. Men no longer wished to depend on heaven. They wanted greatness by their own power. And in that moment, Babel began to feel less like a city. It was becoming the first great unified human system, a civilization driven by collective ambition. But something disturbing surrounded the colossal structure. The higher the tower climbed, the more the environment itself seemed to reject it. The sky darkened too early. Lightning crossed the clouds above the summit. Violent winds swept through the upper platforms. Some workers whispered that the tower should never reach such heights. Others claimed they felt fear while climbing toward the highest levels, as if something unseen watched Babel from above. But no one dared oppose Nimrod, because by then, the dream of Babel had already consumed humanity itself. And still, the tower continued rising.
The days passed, and Babel now dominated the known world. Caravans crossed endless deserts just to witness the colossal city rising on the horizon. Merchants arrived carrying gold, silver, rare stones and metals from distant lands. Priests observed the heavens from the upper platforms. Architects designed structures even more ambitious than before. Everything in Babel continued growing without limit. And at the center of that civilization, the tower kept rising. Gigantic, impossible. The lower levels already resembled entire cities stacked upon one another. Massive bridges connected suspended platforms between pillars of burned bronze. Colossal torches illuminated the upper levels throughout the night. And above everything, the summit disappeared into dark clouds. Men looked upon it with fascination, because Babel had become more than a construction. It represented humanity's victory over its own limits. Nimrod watched the tower from the imperial terraces while thousands worked beneath him like a single living organism. One language, one civilization, one will. The problem was that Babel was also changing what existed inside men themselves. Pride spread rapidly. Ambition consumed entire cities. Humanity no longer spoke about survival. They spoke about greatness, dominion, power. Some believed Babel would never fall. Others began declaring that mankind had finally reached the level of the ancient gods. And as those ideas spread, the city itself seemed to lose every remaining boundary. The nights became strange. The wind crossing the upper platforms produced unsettling sounds throughout the corridors of the tower. Workers reported dizziness while climbing to the highest levels. Animals refused to remain near the structure. Even the sky above Babel appeared different. Dark, heavy, unstable. Still, nobody stopped. Because in that moment, humanity believed it was building something eternal. Then, something happened. The biblical account describes the moment in only a few words, but its impact would echo throughout all human history. And the Lord confused the language of men. At first, it seemed almost imperceptible. Small mistakes, orders misunderstood, tools delivered incorrectly, builders arguing without understanding one another. But then, the chaos began. Men suddenly spoke unfamiliar words. Entire sentences lost meaning. Architects shouted commands no one could comprehend. Priests stared at one another in panic. The sound of Babel changed completely. The city that once functioned like a single body now collapsed into absolute confusion. Thousands of voices echoed across the gigantic platforms of the tower, but no one could understand anyone anymore. Fear spread quickly. Arguments erupted. Violence exploded among workers. Tools were abandoned. Caravans attempted to flee the city. Order vanished before Nimrod's eyes. And for the first time, Babel seemed vulnerable. The tower remained motionless upon the horizon, gigantic, but now silent, unfinished. The winds crossed its empty platforms while crowds slowly abandoned the city. Entire families departed in different directions. Tribes separated. Peoples vanished beyond the horizon. And so, humanity scattered across the earth once again. But the most disturbing part is that the fall of Babel destroyed far more than a tower. It shattered the illusion that mankind could remain united through pride alone. Even so,
the idea never truly disappeared. Because after Babel, other empires emerged attempting to repeat the same dream. Babylon, Rome, entire civilizations trying to concentrate power, wealth, and dominion under a single system, as if the echo of that ancient tower continued crossing the centuries. And perhaps that is exactly what makes Babel so unsettling even today. Because the tower never represented architecture alone. It represented something much greater. Humanity attempting to replace heaven itself, seeking greatness without limits, reaching for absolute power through collective ambition. Men were scattered, but the desire remained alive. And throughout history, it continued returning under different forms. Empires, governments, civilizations, global systems, always driven by the same ancient promise: unity, control, greatness. Perhaps that is why Babel remains one of the most symbolic stories ever recorded by humanity. Because somewhere in history, men truly believed they could touch the heavens. And for one brief moment, they almost seemed capable of it. But while Babel was falling, another city slowly began emerging from the shadows of the ancient world. A city carrying the same spirit as the tower, the same pride, the same obsession with power: Babylon. And perhaps the true legacy of Babel began exactly there.
Some mysteries were never meant to be forgotten. Ancient civilizations, forbidden scriptures, lost worlds buried beneath history itself. What if the Bible contains secrets humanity still cannot fully explain? Welcome to Echoes of Revelation. Explore the unknown.